guys, welcome back to the Reflection Room. I am so excited to be back with you guys. I was watching something on TikTok. It was a video, and this girl said that she couldn't find a dress for New Year's Eve, or it didn't fit or something like that. So she ended up going to her mother's closet. Gosh, definitely made me feel old, which is ironic because of what we're talking about today. Anyways, and she put on her mother's dress for New Year's Eve when it was turning 1999. Anyways, yeah, and it got me thinking, gosh, I remember when it was turning 1999. Or when it was turning 2000, and it was like a big thing. Anyways, well, Happy New Year to everyone out there. I hope you guys had a great Christmas and had a great New Year. And that is actually slightly related to what I'm talking about today. I came across this article. It was being advertised or promoted on Yahoo Life, although I have to go back and look and see where it was originally published. I can't remember what website, although we'll make sure to put it down in the comments. But the article was actually titled "Reasons Some People Want Boomers Removed from Social Media." So of course, I think that would spark anyone's interest, right? So I clicked on it, and then it did get me thinking a little bit, the connection with the holidays. It got me thinking a little bit about, just typically how people gather with their families during the holidays, and you have, all the various generations. Typically there might be 2-3 generations that are gathering together, and it's during that time when everyone's under the same roof that you begin to see some of the generational differences when it comes to a lot of things, when it comes to traditions, dress code, I don't know, things that people talk about or find it okay to talk about at a dinner table, gift giving, manners, habits, routines, the whole thing. And sometimes things get a little bit tense, or sometimes trauma is kind of kicked up a little bit for some people. It's not necessarily the best time for some people, during the holidays and stuff. So it definitely got me thinking a little bit about what we, many of us have just experienced. So I definitely had to go and read the article, and I thought it was really interesting. Although the article does have a bit of a biased or a slanted view or take on social media and the way that the different generations utilize social media. Today, I thought it would be really interesting to kind of talk about it, less from the stance of like boomers are the problem, and more so from like the perspective of how like social media exposes just generational communication gaps that we really all contribute to, no matter what generation you find yourself kind of falling into, whether you fall into the boomer generation, the millennial generation, and then I don't even know what comes after that. I know there's a generation X or A or Z, I don't know, but whatever those generations are. And so I thought it'd be, worth kind of exploring a little bit today. And so one of the questions I kind of wanted to pose a little bit is like, ever wonder why online conversations between, I guess, mainly boomers and the younger generations blow up so fast, especially about, politics or religion or news or even, social issues. And we saw some of that really kind of play out, especially over the last few years, especially during like the COVID times. And I think it has less to do, although age does kind of play a bit of a part, I think it has less to do about age, and it's about how social media changed the rules of communication faster than some generations honestly could really kind of adapt. And so as a mental health counselor professional, I wanted to kind of zoom out from blaming boomers, so boomers are off the hook, over the next few minutes, and talk about generational communication styles and kind of share 2 to 3 practical tips on how to make those conversations less toxic and more human if you do in fact find yourself sometimes either involved in or facing conversations like that on social media. And honestly, it doesn't even have to be on social media. It could be in a family text thread, or it could be in, I don't know, maybe a communication platform at at work that maybe your employer uses or something like that. Just somewhere where there's communication that is happening, where you're involved and there are multiple generations that are present. So I thought it'd be, kind of interesting to kind of talk about. But first I wanted to identify what might be transpiring during those moments of communication where there are people just coming together from, different generations. So the first thing I wanted to kind of identify is what I'll refer to as like authority versus skepticism. So some of the older generations, let's say prior to the millennial generation, so like the boomers, kind of grew up trusting like very like professional edited kind of gate kept information. So like newspapers, like the network news. And so this idea of experience or an expert or someone who had a lot of years in the field, or, maybe had a number, it just was older, let's say, just higher age, essentially. Traditionally, that equaled authority. Yeah, they were seen kind of like authority, or were able to speak on a subject matter, or were seen as experts. Younger generations were raised on the internet where information was just kind of a little messy. It's like the world of Wikipedia where anybody can press edit and write whatever it is that they're wanting to write, right? So we're kind of used to information being contested. So we grew up in this world of skepticism where we would hear something and then we would open up another tab and fact check whatever it was that we were hearing or we were reading. Totally ignore my dog in the corner here that's scratching at his bowl. So that was one thing, right? So we have the authority versus skepticism. The other thing I wanted to kind of point out that sometimes happens in those settings is the differences in communication length and then communication tone. So some of the older generations oftentimes use maybe longer, more assertive posts or text threads or messages, and kind of see that as being very clear, very thorough. Like, I am covering all of my bases. I'm crossing every T, I'm dotting every I, I'm not leaving any rock unturned, right? And then some of the younger generations are used to more leaner, more shorter messages, kind of straight to the point, kind of rapid paced scrolling. We're used to so much stimuli coming at us at once. The idea of visual communication being so quick. We live in this instant world, right, where there's short memes and short stories and reels and shorts. It's literally called a short. And then this idea of like a long message, we kind of sometimes might equate with like long lectures, and then there's this association that's attached to that as like, maybe being kind of controlling or wanting to push one's message onto us, or maybe kind of dismissing or minimizing what it is that we're thinking. And so as you can see, we can kind of begin to maybe kind of understand where some of this tension might begin to come up or arise on social media as we have the different generations, maybe looking at something, but kind of looking at it from different angles. And then this one's a little bit more obvious, but I think there's a difference in what is seen as humorous or what is seen as funny. What one generation might see as funny, another generation might see as offensive. Sarcasm, wittiness, jokes, especially if there is a lack of being able to not hear the tone or being able to see facial cues, because that's, missing online, specifically if we're talking about social media, right? Or any other kind of text communication that's going on there. And so we can kind of begin to see how conflict might be able to kind of escalate fairly quickly. And so when you begin to mix kind of different expectations about authority or tone or humor all together in one kind of common thread, the result, is often less conversation and, and a bit more friction. So here are a few tips that I would recommend as a mental health counselor, that I've kind of personally have used, but then also have maybe given over the years to some of my clients that sit across from me, that we have these exact same conversations about real life issues that they have faced over the years. So the one thing I would say is sometimes it's really important to kind of differentiate the problem for the person or kind of personify the problem. Another way to say that is to kind of name the pattern, not the person. And so instead of saying things like you're so sensitive or you're being really disrespectful, I think it's important to try to name the pattern and saying things like, I think we're kind of maybe reading this comment a little bit differently, or I'm beginning to kind of notice that we might value different sources of information. And so again, we're not really using words like you or your, and instead we're focusing on some of the things we're noticing about the differences in our styles. And so instead, I think inviting curiosity and asking questions about the other person and might be really helpful in helping kind of reduce shame and decrease defensiveness. So kind of beginning questions like, help me understand, or can you share with me? And then maybe kind of ending the question with something that you're interested in better understanding, or kind of wanting to wrap your mind around, can be really helpful because it makes the conversation about communication differences rather than character attacks. So that's the first tip. The second tip I would say is sometimes it's important to kind of move the message to a different medium. And what I mean by that is, conflicts can explode oftentimes because they're happening in the wrong place. Public social media posts or group chats, or like I mentioned, like in employment platform, communication platform where there's an audience. And so sometimes those kinds of platforms, communication can really kind of be misunderstood. So I would encourage to kind of shift the conversation to a more private platform. And so saying something like, this feels, too important for an open kind of public space like this. We talk on the phone or have a video chat, or just move it to a more private thread. Or, even for families, saying something like, maybe let's move this from Facebook and have a real conversation over dinner about it. And so I think using richer communication channels like a video chat or face-to-face, or even a more personal one-on-one text thread allows for richer conversation, depending on which one you choose, allows for nonverbal cues and body language and more context, which I think can be really crucial, especially when we're having communication with others across generational lines. And then the third tip that I would offer is, this might sound a little bit silly for some people, but I think sometimes it's important to kind of create shared rules for online spaces, especially for really tight, close-knit friend groups, or even, family circles. And so identifying some online rules, very similar to how you would have house rules for family, and saying, these are the top 2-3 things that we refuse to do, whether it's name calling, or if I say that I'm getting a little bit overwhelmed, then we're going to pause the conversation and we're not going to go back to it until we feel comfortable enough to revisit it. Or if we may disagree about ideas, but we're never going to attack each other's identity or character, or something along those lines. And I think having those online rules for online spaces, I think, can be, really important to make sure that we continue to focus on being able to have disagreements about important conversations, but making sure to never attack the person, and just continuing to have the conversation about the topics and the issues, and not the person. So I would say personally, this is my thought. It'd be really interesting to hear what everybody else has to, what your guys' thoughts are. But at the end of the day, I think social media, didn't really invent necessarily generational tension. I think that was always there. I think it just kind of turned up the volume on miscommunication because of the way that the different generations use social media. For some generations, it was there from birth, and from others, it wasn't. And so there's something that there's a phrase that I like to use sometimes in my sessions, depending on what it is that we're talking about. And the phrase is turning clashes into chances. And so I think this is a situation where that applies. I think it's something that can definitely be be turned around and be fixed and be smoothed out if the individuals involved are willing to turn these clashes or these very tense moments into chances or opportunities to better understand each other, and remove whatever barriers and obstacles are in the way that are preventing smooth communication between the different generations. So if you found this helpful, I would encourage you guys to share this with someone from a different generation that you care about, and begin to have calmer conversations there with your loved one instead of in the comment sections of social media posts. So thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. I love reading, just random articles like this online. I love thinking about them and seeing how they apply to my personal life in ways that I could also, apply them to my counseling sessions, and then also just having, conversations like this with you guys. So thanks so much for spending this time with me. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Love to hear your thoughts as always. Yeah, I encourage you guys to continue to do your own reflecting. Thanks so much. Take care.